When I was a kid, my family used to visit my grandparents' house every summer. Their property was surrounded by dense woods, a place I loved to explore with my cousins. But there was one part of the forest no one dared to enter, a patch of trees that stood unnaturally still, even on the windiest days. Everyone called it the Quiet Grove. One summer, when I was around 12, my curiosity got the better of me. My cousins refused to go, so I ventured into the Quiet Grove alone. The air felt heavy, as if I was walking underwater. There were no sounds, no birds, no insects, not even the rustling of leaves. It was eerie. Then I saw a treehouse. It was old and covered in vines, but it seemed solid, like it had been waiting for someone. Strangely, I didn't remember ever seeing it before. Even though I'd explored these woods so many times, something about it drew me in. The ladder was still intact, so I climbed up. Inside, the treehouse was larger than it should have been, given the size of the tree. The walls were covered in drawings, crude, childlike sketches of people, but their faces were scratched out, leaving only blank ovals. In the corner, there was a pile of old toys, a broken doll, a toy car missing its wheels, and a teddy bear with its head torn off. As I looked around, I noticed something even stranger. There was a small window, but instead of showing the forest outside, it showed something else, a dark, foggy landscape with twisted trees. It was as if the treehouse wasn't just a treehouse, but a doorway to another place. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I leaned closer to the window, trying to understand what I was seeing. That's when I heard a soft giggle, like a child's, coming from behind me. My heart stopped. I spun around, but the treehouse was empty. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. Just the giggle again, this time louder. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. I backed toward the ladder, ready to climb down, but before I could, something started tapping on the walls, first one tap, then another, until it sounded like dozens of tiny hands knocking all around me. The giggling grew louder, turning into laughter that didn't sound like a child anymore. It was distorted, almost animalistic. I didn't think. I just climbed down as fast as I could. But as I hit the ground and looked up, I saw something peeking out of the treehouse window. It was small, pale, and had no face, just a blank, smooth surface where its features should have been. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the Quiet Grove and back at my grandparents' house. I tried to tell them what I saw, but they just shook their heads. My grandpa looked more serious than I'd ever seen him and said, "That's why we don't go there. Some places are meant to be left alone." I never went back to the Quiet Grove, not even after my grandparents passed away and the property was sold. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about that treehouse. In my dreams, I'm back inside, and the laughter is getting closer. The worst part. A few months ago, I found an old photo of my grandparents' backyard. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was the treehouse. It wasn't hidden by vines or weathered by time. It looked brand new. And I swear, there was someone standing in the window. I'll never forget the photo. It made my blood run cold. I couldn't stop staring at the figure in the treehouse window. It wasn't just standing there, it was watching. Even though it had no face, I knew it was looking at me. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but the more I looked at the photo, the clearer the figure became. It was small, like a child, but its body didn't look right. Its arms were too long, and its head was slightly tilted, as if it was trying to mimic a human posture but didn't quite understand how. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the treehouse. I heard the tapping, the giggling, and the laughter that wasn't quite laughter. Around 2 a.m., I heard a noise outside my window. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers lightly drumming on glass. I froze. My bedroom was on the second floor. There shouldn't have been anyone outside my window. Slowly, I turned to look. The curtains were closed, but I could see the faint outline of something standing on the other side. The tapping stopped. Then, the giggle. That same distorted, animalistic giggle I'd heard in the treehouse. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My body felt paralyzed, like I was trapped in a nightmare. The figure outside the window didn't move, but I felt its presence, heavy and suffocating. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to grab my phone and turn on the flashlight. When the beam of light hit the window, there was nothing there. Just the curtain, swaying slightly, as if someone had just been standing there. The next morning, I checked the yard beneath my window. The grass was damp with dew, but there were no footprints. Still, I knew what I'd heard, what I'd felt. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that treehouse had followed me. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. At night, I'd wake up to find my bedroom door wide open, even though I'd locked it before going to bed. My belongings started moving on their own. My keys would disappear and turn up in places I'd never put them. Once, I found my childhood teddy bear sitting in the middle of my bed. I hadn't seen that bear in years, and I didn't even know where it had been stored. The worst was the dreams. Every night, I was back in the treehouse. The tapping surrounded me, the laughter echoed in my ears, and the faceless thing would crawl closer and closer. Each time I woke up just before it reached me, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. One night I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I drove back to my grandparents' old house. The new owners had cleared a lot of the forest, but the quiet grove was still there. It was darker than I remembered, the trees towering like sentinels. The treehouse was waiting. It looked exactly the same as it had all those years ago, as if time hadn't touched it. My heart pounded as I climbed the ladder, but I needed to know. I needed to understand. Inside, it was just as I'd left it except for one thing. There was a new drawing on the wall. This one wasn't scratched out. It was of me. I stumbled back, nearly falling through the trapdoor. The giggle started again, but this time it was louder, closer. The walls of the treehouse began to shake, and the window, the one that showed the strange, twisted landscape, started glowing with a sickly green light. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The air around me felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. Then, I saw it, the faceless thing crawling out of the glowing window. Its long arms reached for me, its head tilting back and forth in jerky, unnatural movements. Finally, my survival instinct kicked in. I scrambled down the ladder and ran, not daring to look back. As I reached the edge of the quiet grove, I heard one last sound, a whisper, so faint I almost didn't catch it. Come back. I never did. But the treehouse hasn't left me. Even now, years later, I feel its pull. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear the giggle. And every so often, I'll wake up to find a new drawing on my wall, crude, childlike, and always of me. I thought leaving the treehouse behind would mean leaving the terror behind. But whatever was in that cursed place had attached itself to me, like a shadow that wouldn't fade. A week after my final visit to the quiet grove, I started noticing strange marks on my skin. At first, they looked like scratches, faint and harmless. But as the days went by, they became clearer lines, symbols, almost like writing. I couldn't read it, but it looked disturbingly familiar. It reminded me of the scrawls I'd seen on the walls of the treehouse. I went to doctors, but none of them had an answer. They thought it might be a rash or an allergic reaction, but no treatments worked. Worse, the marks weren't static, they moved. I'd go to bed with one set of marks and wake up with new ones, as if something was writing on me while I slept. One night, I set up my phone to record myself while I slept, hoping to catch whatever was happening. When I watched the footage the next morning, I almost threw up. Around 3 a.m., the room grew darker, even though my bedside lamp was on. A shadow appeared in the corner, stretching and growing until it reached my bed. Then, something began to crawl out of the shadow, a pale, faceless figure with long, spindly limbs. It didn't walk. It dragged itself toward me, its body twisting unnaturally. When it reached the bed, it leaned over me and began moving its finger across my skin, like it was writing. The marks appeared where it touched. I could hear faint giggling, though I didn't remember hearing it in the moment. The creature stayed for hours, just watching me after it finished. Then, just before the sun rose, it crawled back into the shadow and disappeared. I didn't sleep for days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it the way it moved, the way it lingered over me. I considered burning the treehouse down, but the thought of going back there filled me with dread. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't help. The treehouse wasn't the source. It was just the doorway. The markings on my skin grew more elaborate, covering my arms, legs, even my chest. They burned sometimes, like someone was carving them into me with a hot knife. And then, one morning, I woke up to find a message written across my stomach. Almost time. Then I heard the voice. It wasn't giggling this time. It was speaking, low and guttural, a language I couldn't understand. But one word was clear: come. The bed shook violently, and the lights flickered. Shadows stretched across the walls, forming the outline of the treehouse. The air was filled with the sound of scratching, laughter, and whispers, all blending into a cacophony that made my head throb. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, "What do you want from me?" Everything went silent. Then, from the shadowy outline of the treehouse, the faceless figure stepped forward. Its elongated fingers pointed at me, and the voice answered, "You." I blacked out. When I woke up, I was back in my car, parked on the edge of the quiet grove. I don't remember driving there, but my hands were on the steering wheel, and the keys were in the ignition. The forest was darker than ever, and the treehouse was visible, even from the road, glowing faintly like it was alive. I knew I couldn't run anymore. Whatever this thing was, it wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. With shaking hands, I stepped out of the car and walked into the woods. The treehouse welcomed me. The ladder was down, and as I climbed, I felt the air grow heavier, colder. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings, hundreds of them. All of me. Some showed me as a child, others as an adult, but in every drawing I was surrounded by faceless figures, their long arms reaching for me. The window glowed again, revealing the foggy, twisted landscape. This time I saw something moving on the other side. Dozens of pale, faceless creatures, crawling toward the window, toward me. The tapping started again, but it wasn't just on the walls this time. It was inside my head, like hundreds of fingers drumming against my skull. The voice spoke again, clearer than ever. "Join us." I don't know what happened next. All I remember is waking up in a hospital. They told me hikers found me unconscious at the edge of the forest, covered in scratches and burns. My skin was clean, no symbols, no writing. But I wasn't free. I could still feel it watching me. Even now, as I write this, I hear the tapping. I see shadows shifting in the corners of the room. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of the treehouse in my reflection. It's waiting for me to come back. And I'm afraid one day I will.